maybe we just try to make a photo, please, if you give us the chance to do so, because afterwards it will be difficult. So, where are our photo people? Okay. Come forward, take time. Yeah, take another one. Okay, so maybe now with the ambassadors. Ambassador Bimo and Ambassador Kircheva, please come. Friedel, Minister. So, maybe at the other side, okay. So, okay. Okay, thank you. This is Mr. Brick's wife and my wife. So,
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, normally we don't start with photographs, but we felt that it's better to do it like this. Welcome at the Diplomatic Academy, and especially please join me in welcoming the Prime Minister of the Republic of Kosovo, Albin Kurti. Please welcome also our moderator, Werner Fastelabend, who is a good friend of the Diplomatic Academy. We are here on behalf of the Austrian Institute of European and Security Studies, the Diplomatic Academy, and the Embassy of the Republic of Kosovo. So allow me also to welcome the Ambassador of Kosovo to Austria. I'm only welcoming you, but let me say a few words about the Prime Minister, because as far as I understand, he is one of those symbols of what happens in the Western Balkans when you look into his biography. He started as a student activist in Pristina, and if you were a student activist in the 90s, I guess one of the possibilities was that you end up in prison. And that's what happened to him. Not only once, but twice, later on also in the Kosovo period. But he was steadfast in his support for the independence of Kosovo. He founded later on a party with the name of Self-Determination in English, and he became twice the party chairman, I understand, of this party. And finally, that's one of those stories in the Western Balkans which I think a very good one. He was the first prime minister voted in by more than 50% of the votes for his party in the last elections. Just let me say that this experience from student activist, from experiencing how difficult it is to live in a situation where it's unclear what the future of the whole region will be, to the prime minister of this country, which is still fighting with a lot of things to, but has a clear path. The clear path is a European path. I think is very making us hopeful for the whole region. And that's why I think the title that Mr. Kurti has chosen for today, Western Balkans, a central piece to lasting peace in Europe, is self-confident, but I think it's the right approach in such a situation. And we should not believe that because of all the Wendezeit discussion that we have any chance to forget that a lasting peace in Europe is only possible with the Western Balkan countries. And I have to say, I think I follow this with a lot of support, that Kosovo is taking step by step the approaches. Now it's visa liberalization. On the 15th or 14th of December, it was the application to join the European Union. And I guess this sort of pragmatic way forward is the best political move that one can take at this given situation. And maybe, if I may say at the beginning, one of the problems, as I see it, is also the wording. Because when I was active in the foreign ministry, we always spoke about Southeastern Europe, not the Western Balkans. And this included, if I remember rightly, actually also Slovenia, Croatia, even Greece wasn't maybe regarded as part of Southeastern Europe. So maybe we should not forget that this is not something like in a time capsule, the Western Balkan. It's a region with a European history, with all the problems that we more or less know and understand how they happen. So I would say, even if we call it Western Balkans for various reasons, it's Southeastern Europe. And my final point is really actually the Austrian commitment, but the Prime Minister heard it today from our Federal Chancellor, and also a few very concrete things that have been discussed. And I can only give the commitment of this place, of the Diplomatic Academy. We stay committed in receiving students from Kosovo. We stay committed to going to Pristina with our students. And we stay committed to invite young diplomats to help them also build up the Diplomatic Academy in Pristina. And finally, I'm not sure, Prime Minister, what about your dreams? But I guess politicians cannot afford too many dreams. But if I would be the Prime Minister of Kosovo and I think about dreams in the future, there are very strange things that come to my mind. The first thing is actually, I wouldn't like foreign soldiers in my country. I wouldn't like foreign soldiers in my country. I know this is very strange to say today, but I guess in your wish, in your dream, this is something. And actually, my second dream that would come up is the idea that there is a word in Marcus in the Bible saying, love thy neighbor as yourself. Love thy neighbor as yourself. I hope that we can come to a situation where that's possible. Also for the Prime Minister of Kosovo to say that you can love your neighbor as yourself. And the last one is something that maybe is maybe specific for what you said also in the past. In a democracy, you also need possibilities for direct democracy. So maybe in your dream, there is the idea that in a future time, there is a possibility for a referendum to let the Kosovar decide on the options that are on the table. I know all my three dreams are not yet in your head. They can't be, but let someone here at an educational institution give these dreams, and hopefully in the future, some of them may come true. So welcome from our side.
Your Excellency, dear Mr. Prime Minister, esteemed Prime Minister, Ambassador Briggs, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure also for me to welcome all of you in the name of the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy. I not only want to welcome you, it's also a pleasure to have an old friend, former Defense Minister Friedrich Fischenschlager, also the ambassadors, Bimo from Albania and Kitcheva, who had been working already, also the Irish Ambassador O'Leary, and so many diplomats. I just want or cannot mention all of them. It's a great pleasure also to welcome people from the different ministries and from academia, like old friends like Peter Haider, Georg Krauchenborg, Paul Michaljewicz, and many others, and of course also from the press. But it for sure is a special privilege for us to welcome you, Mr. Prime Minister. I have to admit, you know, the first time when I met Prime Minister Kurti, he still was an opposition politician. And I did not meet him in Kosovo, but in Tirana at the conference. But already at this moment, you could feel that this personality certainly is an outstanding politician and statesman, and he will come sooner or later. This was no question for me that this would happen. And okay, so of course I was interested also in his person, and I found out that he did not have a normal career as politicians in Europe. When he had joined the students' organization, then the war broke out, you know. And okay, he not only was working also for KLM, but he also was imprisoned for more than 2.5 years. And he even was brought from Kosovo to Serbia when the Serbian troops left afterwards. So far, his fate certainly was quite difficult. But my experiences in such a case, you know, people who are going through such an experience, they get harder and they get stronger. And this certainly was the case. And something similar also happened, you know, when he became candidate of his party he had founded himself together with some activists. And okay, the first time when he got the majority and when he was designed to become prime minister, he became prime minister, but only for 2.5 months. Because after a few weeks, his coalition partner left, and okay, the government fell. But he was not the type to give up. And around about a year later, he came back with such a strong majority, with an absolute majority, that nobody could speculate whether he would have a coalition partner that could keep also the balance and could keep the government. And insofar, it really was a pleasure when we met afterwards at different opportunities. And I only can say, of course, you became the prime minister of a country, new country, not even recognized by all the EU members. 5 are missing. You became the prime minister of a country in a region that certainly had difficulties not only in the last decades, but you could say in the last centuries. You became the prime minister in a situation that certainly was not easy at all. But it is quite necessary in such a situation to have a strong prime minister, a strong government. And I only can say that the way to stick to your own principles on the one hand, but on the other hand also to be flexible, to try to get consensus, to reach a compromise with other sides, certainly is of absolute priority. And insofar, it's a great pleasure for me, Mr. Prime Minister, to have you here. And may I ask to take the floor and give us your speech. Maybe we can put, you want to stand here, or maybe people would see you better if we can place it at the forum, okay? Let's do it just within a moment, if you allow us, Mr. Prime Minister. So,
dear Dr. Emil Brix, Director of the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna, dear Werner Fasselabend, President of the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy, dear academics, diplomats, ambassadors, and students, I'm honored to be here with you at the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna, where for 2 centuries men and women have studied and researched and trained and had their journeys into their careers in international leadership. Earlier today, with the Honorable Chancellor Karl Nehammer, I mentioned that Vienna is known as the city of great composers and great thinkers alike. But Vienna is also the city of diplomacy, which has hosted innumerable peace conferences and shaped historic dynamics. I know that you have cooperation with our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and that many of our diplomats have been trained here. I am grateful for that and encourage increased cooperation in further training of our rather young diplomatic corps. So thank you for the opportunity to address you here today at this honorable institution. That we're living in changing times has already been established. That which many feared and hoped wouldn't happen already has happened. Russia invaded Ukraine, a democratic and peace-loving country that did nothing to provoke its neighbor. This has had a profound impact on geopolitics and has ultimately shaken Europe out of complacency. The Chancellor of Germany, Olaf Scholz, has already given a name to such a change. He calls it Zeitenwende. The war in Ukraine has left many commentators wondering, how did we get here? While I don't have the answers to all the difficult questions that have surfaced after Russia's aggression in Ukraine and the renewed tensions in the Western Balkans or Southeast Europe, for that matter, I will try to give my own view on why we find ourselves here and what is needed to get to a better place. After the horrors of the Second World War and the Holocaust, Europe and the world vowed to never again allow such atrocities to happen. Yet we saw genocide happening in Europe again, in Bosnia and Kosovo and around the world, in Rwanda, Darfur, Iraq, and Syria. The Holocaust survivor and author Elie Wiesel said that never again is a phrase that is much more than a slogan. It is a prayer, a promise, a vow, never again the glorification of base, ugly, dark violence. Coming from the contested region and war-torn country, I witnessed the destructive power of hate against our people, which culminated in ethnic cleansing and genocide by Serbian forces. Unavoidably, we ask ourselves, why did it happen again? How could we allow genocide to happen again in Europe? The answer, as complicated as we tend sometimes to see it, I believe is rather simple. It lies in the unwillingness to face the past and embrace the future, and to distance from war criminals who committed genocide. Instead, we see glorification of war criminals, but also the glorification of an imperialist past, a return to times of territorial expansion, of past glory, of power and domination over others, which, as we see in the case of Russian aggression in Ukraine, goes as far back as the Middle Ages. It lies also in the inability to accept the other as an equal human being. Seems obvious, but it's not as natural as it should be. To accept, therefore, one another's existence and legitimate aspirations. Such thinking leads to hatred for the other, which then spills over into violence. Ideological differences, race, religion, age, or beliefs, language, gender, And all that makes us different from one another are then exploited to portray the other as the enemy. I do not believe that differences bring conflict, but their instrumentalization for political or economic gain turns them into conflict. That is what we saw in the last century. This is what led to many wars and conflicts. In the biggest part of Europe, the answer to such never-ending carnage was the birth of the European community, now known as the European Union. Sometimes it is easy to forget, but the European Union as a project of peace and historical process of cooperation among old adversaries was only possible after acceptance of responsibility for the war, after meaningful repentance that led to the kneeling of a chancellor and the embrace of true democracy. So what does all this have to do with the Western Balkans? Or lasting peace in Europe, one might ask. I believe everything. The main and the only reason why we still see tension in almost every Western Balkan country is because the aggressor, the one that initiated all the wars in former Yugoslavia, refuses to take responsibility. Instead of acknowledging and accepting its own role, wants to portray differences across the region as the source of conflict. Almost 24 years after genocides in Bosnia and Kosovo, Serbia doesn't accept any crimes. It has never apologized nor taken any responsibility. On the contrary, its current leadership, which was in power at the time of Milosevic, laments its territorial losses and considers war criminals as heroes. In Serbia, in the Danube River, near Tekija village, a fisherman notices an object floating on the water. It is a piece of a truck. A diver is called, and at the bottom of the river they find a slaughterhouse freezer truck. As they pull the truck out of water, human legs start falling from the back. They open the doors, and inside they find 86 bodies, including 3 heads. Among them is the body of a little girl, only 7 years old. While checking her belongings, they find her school bag. Inside the bag is a UNICEF notebook, wooden crayons, and a little doll. In the notebook, there were drawings of houses and flowers. She was killed in Kosovo, put in the slaughterhouse freezer truck, and sank to the bottom of the river. After they found her, together with other bodies, they load into another truck. To this day, we don't know where they took those bodies. We don't know the girl's name, how she looked, and who her parents are. She is among 1,617 forcefully disappeared persons. While we know she will never return to the house and the flowers she painted we will never see again with her, we will always tell her story, and we will never rest until her fate is known. And we will always remember her and 1,133 children that were killed by Serbia during 1998-1999. Beneath a police shooting range in Belgrade suburb in Batajnica, just a walking distance from Belgrade's Republic Square, the bodies of more than 744 Albanians were found in a mass grave. Those bodies were buried in Kosovo, then exhumed and transported to Serbia for secret reburial in an effort to hide evidences of war crimes. Among those bodies were 46 members of the Berisha family, 14 of them under 15 years old, including 2 babies and a pregnant woman. Near the mass grave, a new Serbian Orthodox church has been built. To this day, 5 mass graves in Batajnica, Rudnica, Križevac, Perućac, and Petrovo Selo, with a total of 950 bodies, have been found in Serbia. Yet there isn't a memorial plaque nor a single sign that indicates that there was a mass grave in all of these places. Today, the perpetrator that committed genocide just a little more than 2 decades ago acts as a victim and denies the crimes. Complete denial. But we don't forget the story of a 7-year-old girl killed, put in the slaughterhouse freezer truck, and buried at the bottom of the Danube River will not be forgotten. Starting this month until June, when KFOR troops entered Kosovo in 1999, almost every day we have memorials of massacres committed by Serbia. So for as long as the leadership in Serbia refuses to accept their past crimes, apologize for their wrongdoing, true and meaningful peace in the Western Balkans is still far from reach. Instead of apologizing, Serbia continues to threaten its neighbors, interfere in their internal affairs, and use ethnic minorities as a tool for destabilization instead of helping their integration. Last century's ambition for a greater Serbia has now been changed to Serbian world policy, identical to the Russian world policy in quest for hegemony and dominance. And yet, despite all of this, the Republic of Kosovo is constructively engaged in the dialogue with Serbia to seek normalization of relations. At the Paris Peace Forum last year, I said that Kosovo wants peaceful and good neighborly relations with Serbia, and that we are ready to extend our hand if they are ready to unclench their fist. It is clearly not the lack of will from our side to move forward into a cooperative future, but the unwillingness of Serbia to distance herself from her past. The question should be, why isn't Serbia ready to accept responsibility, to apologize and extend the hand of reconciliation to the victims of its aggression? Again, the answer is rather simple. Serbia never fully transformed. It never meaningfully prosecuted and sentenced war criminals, but instead became a safe haven for them. The European Union, on the other hand, instead of sanctioning Serbia's threats and aggression towards its neighbors, has rewarded it with billions of EU investments and advanced towards EU membership. What Serbia's leadership understood is that to get EU money and advance towards EU membership, acceptance of responsibility and distancing itself from Milosevic was not a precondition. In other words, it was possible for Serbia to get EU money while rejecting EU values. Today, Serbia is the only EU candidate country that has not sanctioned nor condemned Russian aggression in Ukraine. To prove its mockery of its obligation to align with EU's foreign policy, last September, their foreign ministers signed an agreement with Russia for mutual consultations while Russia continued its ruthless war in Ukraine. I believe this is wrong. I know many in Brussels expect from Kosovo to deliver in the dialogue without questioning Serbia's irrational demands, which goes contrary to the EU basic values. In an attempt to be neutral towards Kosovo's status, they have become neutral towards Serbia's aggression towards its neighbors and neutral towards Serbia's disregard of EU values. But we are doing our part. Kosovo is ready for dialogue, and it will seek normalization of relations with Serbia despite the latter's malign intentions, because we believe the dialogue has no alternative. But we engage with principles and are value-driven, not simply interest-driven. Interest and values should not be decoupled. We believe that dialogue is about mutual recognition, because mutual recognition between Kosovo and Serbia and true democratization of the whole region brings sustainable peace in the Western Balkans and contributes to a lasting peace in Europe. Meanwhile, we continue to strengthen the state of Kosovo. Although our continent continues to be the most democratic region, credible reports suggest that nearly half of democracies in Europe, a total of 17 countries, have suffered democratic erosion in the last 5 years. Meanwhile, at the world level, half of the world democracies are in retreat, and the number of the countries moving toward authoritarianism in the last 6 years has more than doubled. Kosovo, on the other hand, has progressed in the last 2 years. Last year, we improved for 17 places on Transparency International, on the fight against corruption, and same 17 places on the World Press Freedom Index. We were ranked first for the second time in the rule of law in the Western Balkans by the World Justice Project, and second in the world for improvement in the past year. We upgraded to Group B from Group C in the World Bank Government Tech Maturity Index for focus on digital governance. And we had an increase of 17% in budget compared to the previous year. Our GDP growth was 4% after you subtract the inflation. Exports increased by 23%. Tax revenues by 22% without changing fiscal policy. Custom revenues by 11%, and FDI by 47%. We submitted application for membership both in Council of Europe in May last year and in the European Union a month ago, and we look forward to becoming members of NATO's Partnership for Peace program. I am very pleased with Chancellor Nehammer's warm welcome today and his commitment to support our application in the Council of Europe and continued support for our integration process in the European Union. We will work together to further strengthen our bilateral relations. And Austria was among the first countries to recognize our diplomas at a period of great need for our citizens during apartheid of the 90s, 3 decades ago. About 70,000 citizens of Kosovo, many of them who moved here from early 70s till late 90s to escape occupation, made Austria their home. They live, work, and study here and have become our ambassadors and living bridges between our two countries and cultures. We are very grateful for this bond, and we are looking forward to deepening and strengthening our friendly relations even more in every aspect. Next month, we will celebrate the 15th anniversary of Declaration of Independence of Republic of Kosovo. We are indebted to many Austrian diplomats and activists, from Erhard Busek to Albert Rohan, who contributed in our liberation struggle and our independence process. Thank you for this opportunity.
Please. So, Mr. Prime Minister, thank you so much for your speech, for your clear words. Before we open a free discussion for everybody, I would like to say a few words and to ask a question myself. You know, for me, it was more or less a shame for European security policy when the war in ex-Yugoslavia started. Okay, the community of states was surprised. It started in June 1991. First of all, in Slovenia, a few weeks thereafter in Croatia. And everybody could see, you know, that it was only a question of probably a short time, then Bosnia would follow. And it was 3/4 of a year, only in April of 1992, when the war in Bosnia started. And I usually try to say that, you know, everybody could see if this would happen, you know, that a state with such a fragile balance would be inflicted, then it would be almost impossible to restore it again. And it happened. The community of states was not really prepared for that. But already in this period, you could see that this would not be the end of the affair. And if you think that it lasted 6 more years and the war in Kosovo started, you could see, you know, that there was quite a development going on. I was defense minister at that time, and I warned in public that this war in Kosovo would start sooner or later. I was criticized even by my coalition partner, you know. This was the case. But you could not only sense it, you could see it. And it came. And what I think, you know, of course we tried to analyze all the questions. And after Slovenia had become an independent state and Croatia had become an independent state and the Bosnian question was sort of stabilized by the international community, you could see that, okay, now the Western Balkans would be confronted more or less by the meeting, the competition, or also the confrontation between two national movements. On the one hand, strong Serbian nationalism, and on the other hand, also a rising Albanian nationalism. And so far, my question is, you know, you are not only Prime Minister of your country, you're also an ethnic Albanian. You stand to this fact, as far as I see it. For me, it's not so much the question of a detail, but how do you see the future development? How can we bring a solution for this more or less confrontation of the two nationalisms that are the strongest movements in the whole area, and that certainly always will have some tendencies, whether this is in Serbia or in Kosovo or in North Macedonia or in Montenegro, you know, to bring some conflict. So far, my question is, you know, in the long run, what could happen, what should happen in order to stabilize this situation, to bring the two big nations closer to each other, to get a stable Western Balkans, or whatever you want to call it.
Thank you very much. First, I would like to go back to the question regarding my political vocation, if I may say so, in the past and now. I think in the past when we've met, it was more of a struggle than of service, whereas now politics for me is more of a service than a struggle, service to people rather than struggle with rivals. Not forgetting that at the same time there is a struggle between struggle and service. And I think that it is impossible to say that one's consciousness, political consciousness, awareness can always remain above the process in which you are in. Very often you have too many factors that you cannot calculate and so many unknown factors that show up in the second half. Therefore, the amount, not simply of danger or risk, but of unpredictability is high. Therefore, politics become very much practical thing in which you have to do to the best of your abilities and possibilities. However, one should never neglect historical perspective of whatever you do or don't, because there will be effects on both occasions. And in this respect, I would say that I find the conflict in the Balkans not the one between Albanians and Serbs, or between Albanian nation and nationalism, and Serbian nation or nationalism. I see it more as a conflict between Albanians as a people and Serbia as a state. Serbia came about in time of Berlin Congress, almost a century and a half ago, and especially since then, especially around that time, it started its enmity with Albanian people. Because that was the time when the states were very much looking after expansion. And expansion was first and foremost territorial one. On the other hand, the coming about of Serbian states was at large extent a concession of Ottoman Empire to the Russian Empire. So I think that it is since 19th century that Serbia owes very much its existence to Russian Empire. And it has never managed to emancipate itself from this origin. With, be that with Karađorđević or with the Obrenović in the 19th century. So I think that it is not a clash of two nationalisms, let me put it this way. And I never considered Serbian people to be my adversary. On the contrary, I make sure that in every political and social context, I make a clear distinction between the people and the state, be that also state of Kosovo. I never put the sign of equality between people and state. Mm-hmm. Therefore, I would pose the question in a different equation, if I may say so. And let's not dwell any longer on that, because we have many other questions to answer and topics to debate. But I would believe that democratization and Europeanization of Western Balkans, of Southeast Europe, is a precondition for long-term stability and for sustainable peace, where we could live as neighbors and have good relation and normal cooperation. With democratization, I mean rule of law, I mean political pluralism, I mean human rights, and I also mean minority rights. Whereas with Europeanization, I mean enlargement of EU, where the entire Western Balkans would become part of EU, and in this way, EU becomes Europe. Balkans is in Europe, but EU is not Europe. By inclusion of Western Balkans, EU becomes Europe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, thank you for this first bigger question. As I mentioned, you know, you are not only a politician and statesman, you are now in a specific function as Prime Minister of a country that is not extremely big, around about the size of Upper Austria, 1.8 million people, but of course with a very specific geostrategic location. With the exception of Bosnia, Kosovo is neighboring all the other countries of the Western Balkans. And insofar, of course, it is more or less also in the center of developments. Now people, of course, especially in the last months also, have at least followed a little bit questions of Mitrovica. Mitrovica is a region in the northern part of Kosovo where there is a ethnically Serbian group, more or less the majority within a few a few communities and so on. And of course, it came up. Maybe you tell us a little bit what was going on. It was the question of license plates and so on. And maybe you also try to answer the question, what can be done in such a difficult situation where also comes influence from the outside, of course, to establish or to re-establish trust between the two ethnic groups. Not easy, but it is your job.
Yes. My job is not easy. In 1999, with the withdrawal of Serbian police and military forces from 9th of June to 20th of June, also NATO troops were entering Kosovo. Kosovo got liberated. And I believe that Milosevic was in front of a choice. Either some of the power for all of the Serbs in all of the Kosovo territory, or all of the power for some of the Serbs in some of the Kosovo territory. He went for the second. And what has happened was a certain grouping in the northern parts of Kosovo. According to Ron Redmond from UNHCR in July 1999, 80% of the Serbs who left Kosovo did that together with Serbian military and police forces. Today in Kosovo we have around 132,000 Serbs. In 1991 there were 194,000 Serbs. Their number throughout the 90s did not change much, with the exception of police and military forces and their families. So one could say that after the war, 1/3 of Serbs in Kosovo left. But now, out of all the Serbs who are in Kosovo, only 1/3 are in the north, 2/3 are in the south. It is important to notice that the insistence of Belgrade for the north of Kosovo comes very much from talks in Brussels in the years prior to me taking office, namely 2017, 2020, when the idea of territorial exchange or land swap as a euphemism for partitioning Kosovo was turned into a project which ultimately has failed. As an idea, it did not die out, but as a project has failed. So the barricades that we had in the northern part of Kosovo in December last year were barricades who wanted to establish territorialization of the contest, to remove it from liberties and rights and needs of the people towards territorialization of the presence. That's why barricades were not erected elsewhere, but only in the north. There are certain illegal structures of Serbia, not only in the north, but the official Belgrade ordered them to have 16 barricades in legal roads north of Iber River. Previously, throughout 2022, we have closed 16 illegal pathways in the north. And they responded with 16 barricades in legal roads. There is more rule of law now. Only during 2022, we have had almost 900 police operations, arrested over 3,200 people for corruption and organized crime, and around 10% of them being state public officials. Vast majority are Albanians, but also from the minorities. Because I believe that criminals, they have no ethnicity, no nationality. They are just against the rule of law. And they prefer conflict because the outlaws find freedom in conflict. The outlaws find rule of law as suppression, but conflict as freedom. These barricades in the north have been led by Milan Radojcic and Zvonko Veselinovic, two notorious people who have been blacklisted by US Treasury and UK Foreign Secretary, and are very close to President of Serbia and government in Belgrade. Now, we are engaging with Serbian population in dialogue which is not that public, because whatever you publish, they get a phone call. So I cannot defend yet Serbs in Kosovo, so I'm being very carefully in this regard. Now I have Nenad Rašić as Minister of our government for Communities and Return, and he is the only person who is more hated than myself, according to Belgrade tabloids. Not to people. I don't think that people hate us. Not even Serbian people. They don't hate us, not even in Belgrade. But according to Serbian newspapers in Belgrade, I think Nenad Rašić is the only one who is being more attacked and offended in their front pages than myself. Why is this so? Because we have certain leaders in Europe and in the Balkans who think that democracy doesn't need human rights and democracy doesn't need political pluralism. Let me be very clear. I don't believe in illiberal democracy. There is no such thing as illiberal democracy. That's an oxymoron. That's a hoax. You know, without human rights, without political pluralism, you lose democracy itself. People who do not believe in democracy, but want to use electoral democracy for reconfirming and re-legitimizing themselves in power, who see in democratic elections only an instrument and not a value, they go against political pluralism and against human rights. Because in human rights, conceptually, we bring together universality and equality. Human rights bring together universality and equality. But those who believe in so-called illiberal democracy, they are against universality and against equality. Therefore, they are against human rights. But at the same time, they are afraid. And when you are afraid, you don't like political pluralism. Because whenever you see a candle burning, you imagine your house being burned. You overrate the risk and danger. You are dangerous out of your fragility, out of your weakness. Because it takes a weak politician to have a dangerous situation. Not a strong politician, a weak politician. Political pluralism makes us stronger, not weaker. And I'm trying to bring pluralism everywhere. Pluralism means that opposition can win elections. Don't misunderstand me, I want to win again. But opposition should have the chance to win. Opposition should not be there just formally, so we outnumber them 9-1 or 8-2. So it's very important to cherish and nurture the probability and possibility of opposition to win next time elections. And what we see today in Kosovo are the pains of birth of political pluralism among Serbian community. And the fight against political pluralism, which is taking place today in my country and being launched by Belgrade, is the same fight which assassinated Oliver Ivanovic 5 years ago. He wanted to have authentic Serbian politics in Kosovo. It was not allowed. You cannot understand Serbian politics in Kosovo without 3 murders that took place in the last 35 years. The murder of Ivan Stambolic, the murder of Zoran Đinđić, and the murder of Oliver Ivanovic. The murder of Oliver Ivanovic is rather similar to the murder of Ivan Stambolic, because Milosevic killed Stambolic after defeated him. He was a weak politician, afraid that even after defeating Stambolic, he might win someday. Out of fear, he killed Stambolic. Everybody considers Milosevic to be a strong leader. He was fearful. One of the first things he did after winning was killing his rival who has just been defeated. What kind of strength is that? What kind of morale is that? On the other hand, Zoran Đinđić, student of Jürgen Habermas, who was in love with Frankfurt School, he started democracy in Serbia, which lasted for 2.5 years. Got assassinated in March 2003. We will mark 20 years soon. And then dark age was rising again. Lately, Belgrade managed to create one party only for all Serbs of Kosovo, namely Serbian List. And after Serbian List defeated Oliver Ivanovic, he was assassinated. Oliver Ivanovic was defeated in elections of 2017, and he gets killed in 2018. And he gets killed on the 4th anniversary of assassination of another Serbian politician, Dimitrije Janićijević, 16th of January 2014, again in North Mitrovica. So, very often, when we see elections, and we see winners, and we see autocrats, we have to think who has been killed. When autocrats win, time and again, just check who has been killed meanwhile. So, victories of autocrats are not electoral victories. They are not done only with ballot papers in ballot boxes, but also with bullets from the guns. And I think this recent history, which is also after the war, has not been properly scrutinized. First, to enable us to understand, and then to also solve the issues we have. I believe that rule of law, justice, economic cooperation, I'm going to introduce now a new measure as a government to subsidize all employees, all enterprises who are willing to turn their working force into a multi-ethnic, multicultural one. So if an Albanian company wants to employ Serbs, I will subsidize them, and vice versa. I think that labor unions, qualitative universities, women organizations, these are the places where people can work, struggle, and benefit together. And my government will turn into infrastructure, not superstructure, infrastructure for this kind of development. It's not easy, it will take time, but we shall not stop.
Yeah, it would be great if I could continue my questioning, but I guess there are also some other people who want to raise a question, and so far we want to give them a chance. Yeah, maybe we start here in the forefront, and maybe we take 2 or 3 questions together then, okay? Please tell us your name. No speech, but very short question or a very short comment.
Good evening, Trausing my name. I'm just an interested citizen of Austria. Thank you for your presentation, for the discussion. And my question is, let's bring the big elephant into the room. Do you think that this, looking back to the super great history of Russian Empire will stop if Putin will be dead one day? Or that his successors will keep, going on with this, it was so great, we are the unique superpower? And maybe the next question, the second question, sorry, I have to ask this. What is Europe without NATO? Thank you.
Okay, let's take a second question over there in the, yeah.
Jun Saito, University of Vienna and doctoral student. And I got the impression from your speech, so some parallels or some similarity, the relationship between Kosovo, Serbia, and Ukraine, Russia, because Kosovo is the right of the new liberal democracy, and Serbia is for illiberal democracy, and Ukraine is a hope of democracy in the former Soviet Union territory, and Russia is a reactive autocratic state. And do you have any, can you do you receive some threat of a military invasion from Serbia to Kosovo, or do you believe the presence of NATO in the form of KFOR is enough stabilizing factor? Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the third question, the last row.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you, Prime Minister, really great speech. Professor Benedict was here, a great professor, and he was long time ago writing a lot of letters for you as you were in prison and giving calls to leaders. He had to go to Graz, he left, but you mentioned human rights a couple of times. From your point of view, what can Kosovo do, and with your power now, to improve the human rights in Kosovo? Because still Kosovo has a long way to go. Second question is, we kind of were making a joke before. If we see that map, and there are four neighbors of Kosovo, and we would like to see at least tonight 4 ambassadors, plus the ambassador of Kosovo here, and that's not the case. Are we gonna see that maybe in 2 years? Are you optimistic that we can live in peace soon? Because people are tired, 40 years now, if we start counting from 80s. And that's one generation is lost. We don't want to lose the second generation. Are we ready to go for that sign for a peace treaty? And the third question is, today, we know that Kosovo is one of the poorest countries in Europe. And from the investment point of view, if I look what's happening in the Balkans, Serbia is getting the largest one. Do you have a plan for the next 15 years? Because Kosovo is getting 15 in a month. Long-term plan. Even you may not be in the government, but you are still young, and we are glad to have you in power in Balkan because we consider you as one of the best leaders right now. And in 15 years' time, you'll still be young. Thank you very much. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Mr. Prime Minister, you heard we tried to have 3 questions. It became a little bit more. So please, if you are so nice, and try to answer them.
Yes. I was shocked but not surprised when Russian invasion took place in Ukraine. First of all, because of the amassing of troops at the border. And second, because I happen to have read the famous 5,000 words speech of despotic President Putin from summer 2021. And also his speech at the Valdai Club in October 2021, where he was mentioning that that was the year when Russian Federation celebrated 800 years of Alexander Nevsky and 300 years of Peter the Great. That immediately reminded me of Milosevic. Milosevic celebrated 600 years of Battle of Kosovo in 1989, and then he launched attacks to Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, and Kosovo. So this celebration of big mythical, historical events, of dictators who want to have a shortcut with those events, where democracy gets belittled under the weight of history, is typical preparatory phase for war that autocrats do. After celebrating 800 years of Alexander Nevsky and 300 years of Peter the Great, they attack Ukraine. Milosevic, after celebrating 600 years of Battle of Kosovo, attacks Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, and so on. So I was shocked with the atrocities, but not surprised from what has happened. I was surprised with those who were surprised. And that happened in Munich Security Conference. I was there. Over 80% of politicians and diplomats said, no, there will be no attack. And I think that there is a responsibility on our part if we publicly do this kind of misjudgments. Because dictators and autocrats, they count on surprising you as part of the efficiency of what they plan to do. And the other aspect why I think Russian aggression and invasion in Ukraine took place is because we can speak of two Putins, and both of them in this century. I don't mean this other one in Dresden. Two Putins. First Putin was lamenting about the fall of Soviet Union as the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century. But late Putin is not into mourning and lamenting for the fall of Soviet Union, but rather into nostalgia for Russian Empire. So no wonder that despotic President Putin considers Lenin a foe, and Ivan the Terrible, Catherine the Great, and Peter the Great as something and some personalities that he wants to fall in the same register once the history will do its accounting. He wants to fall within this list of Russian leaders who expanded the territories. And namely, he was very critical to Lenin for self-determination of Finland and for allowing Ukrainian identity to emerge. Some might have expected that the greatest foe of Putin is Gorbachev and Perestroika. Not really. Putin's stance on Gorbachev and Perestroika is belittling that. He, for example, in one of his interviews says that, oh, Perestroika is an invention of French socialists. He is against Lenin. And by being against Lenin, he has to go prior to French Revolution. to Peter the Great, mid-18th century. The authors which are now nurturing Russian fascism are the ones like not only Alexander Dugin, but Ivan Ilyin and especially Nikola Berdyaev, which were kicked out from Soviet Union in 1922. Nikola Berdyaev wrote this book, New Middle Age. New Middle Age, where he considers that Renaissance, modernity, Illuminism did a great injustice to Middle Age because Middle Age is not dark, it's night. Actually, some sort of nocturnal beauty of Russian spiritualism, where the Russian Orthodox monk is the sublime figure. So through Nikola Berdyaev and Ivan Ilyin and alike, Putin wants to bring back Russian Middle Age because he thinks that this is how he can allegedly save Christianity through Russian Orthodoxy. And that's why Alexander Nevsky is the main figure and the most valued Medal of Honor, because in one hand, he has been making certain pacts with Tartars and Mongols, while fighting, as they say, Swedes and Teutonic Knights. So a kind of pro-Asiatic against European, but at the same time, orthodoxy against Catholicism. And one small digression, on the first anniversary of the murder of Oliver Ivanovich, President of Serbia flies to Moscow to get the medal Alexander Nevsky from Putin. So history, it's coming back in a very dark way. But this should not make us fearful. We should read more history. It's very important to read more history. History is coming back to politics and geopolitics big time. And we have to read history. And we have to make interesting reading of history and learning of history and researching history to young generations. Because many among young generations consider that history is boring. Well, sometimes it's true, but we have to learn it. We have to read it. And this is my message I wanted to give, because I think in our education system, we have to have new ways of learning interestingly history. So I am optimistic because as Immanuel Kant wrote almost 230 years ago, democracies do not fight each other. And ironically, his famous essay on perpetual peace was written from his hometown, Königsberg, Kaliningrad, you know. So I believe that democracy is the solution, and European democracy is the best platform for democracy as such. This means that Ukraine has to win the war, but also Russian people has to win the other war against Kremlin. It's not easy, it's not quickly, but this is the way. I don't believe that we need Europe without NATO. We want to join EU, and we see how EU wants to join NATO. I handled the application in Prague a month ago, at the same time when the debates about Sweden and Finland wanting to join NATO were more alive than ever. So I don't think there is a real contradiction between EU and NATO. I'm not saying they are identical, but there is not much of contradiction in there. So I cherish the agreement of several days ago between NATO and EU in Brussels. EU as the most important political project and historical process of peace and prosperity has 3 pillars. First is peace with and through anti-fascism. Robert Schuman, 1950, in contrast to Neville Chamberlain, 1938. First pillar is peace, anti-fascist kind of peace. Second pillar is continental European welfare state. And third pillar is NATO security umbrella. All 3 are needed. So at times that we live in, EU and NATO as close with each other, better for all of us. 52% we have increased our expenses for defense in comparison to 2021 last year in Kosovo, and another 20% this year. So we are strengthening our army. We participated in Defender Europe 21 with 330 soldiers. This year, in May, we are going to participate with 1,380 soldiers in Defender Europe 23. So while I call for more NATO soldiers in Kosovo, I'm also strengthening our own defense capacities. I wish I don't have to do this. I wish this money could go to healthcare and education and so on. But then again, I hope that we will manage this money for defense also to link with education and healthcare and universities and research and development and so on and so forth. So we invest more in defense, but defense should not only be military. There are 48 forward operation bases around the borders of our country in Serbia in ground safety zone, 28 military, 20 gendarmeria. So there is this danger. Night wolves and Wagner mercenaries are going around. I'm not saying that they are going to attack us next week or month, but it will be irresponsible to not consider it altogether. So I think more presence of NATO is better for us, because now it's not only Serbia, it's also the impact of Russia in Serbia. Human rights, I think, should be more taught in education system, and family is still the first school. Teacher could become the first mother, is rather the second mother, but I'm telling my own experience. My mother was the first teacher. So I think it's very important in both education system and in our family to teach and learn human rights, to teach and learn gender equality. Because when you try to teach and learn to people in their 20s, quite often is already too late. So in family and in education system, human rights and gender equality. And we all feel tired sometimes, but there is no other way except to rest a bit and work again. So I know that it's in our nature to like comfort. But at times of war in Europe, we have to be comfortable with discomfort. We have to learn to be comfortable with discomfort, because you never know what the near future brings. You have to be ready. As the good English saying says, hope for the best and expect the worst. I think that we have to train each other and ourselves in this mode of being and doing. Not to the detriment of others, but in order to be careful and vigilant so you don't have to be afraid. This is, I think, modus operandi that we could practice. And yes, we're going to celebrate 15 years of our independence. I think in the next 15 years, we have to very much focus on renewables into railway infrastructure, and especially in several small artificial lakes, because Kosovo, our country, is like a plate turned upside down where the rivers leave the country. 90% of waters leave the country. So it is very important to have water supply and irrigation for agriculture. And Sweden and Finland became members of EU 3 years after application. Malta and Cyprus after 14 years. Average is 9. Let's go for the average.
Okay, if you'll allow another round of questions, yeah. Is it okay? Prime Minister?
Of course.
No?
Yes.
Okay, the lady. Ladies first.
Very much. Good evening. Thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Denise. Continuing the Ambassador Brick's points on dreams, I wanted to ask you, you spoke a lot about the next generation. So the generation that dreams for democratization in the Western Balkans, what would you advise them to mobilize the other members and really push for democratization? Thank you so much.
Okay. There was another one, yeah.
Günther Fellinger. My name is Günther Fellinger, and my question is, we had some change in Austrian foreign policy recently in mid-November, and the Chancellor was creating an alliance, or a form of alliance, with the Hungarian Prime Minister and with the Serbian Prime Minister, and it led also to the rejection of Romania and Bulgaria in Schengen, unfortunate. It was very unfortunate veto. My question would be, today in your deliberations with the Prime Minister, did you raise this question? Did you ask him about his relation and why he has moved so close to the President of Serbia, who has threatened war in Europe now 4 times in the last year? And it's a change in Austrian policy, and maybe you can deliberate on that one. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, third one over here in the second.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Lawrence Kettle from the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy. One of my areas is on the Western Balkans. First of all, I believe congratulations are in order. I found out a few hours ago that the European Parliament's Committee for Home Affairs and Civil Liberties passed a resolution that aids in the liberalization of visas for Kosovo citizens into Schengen and other areas. So I think it's a testament to your country's commitment to European values. So first of all, congratulations. Secondly, in previous interviews, you have talked a lot about Vučić being, quote unquote, a puppet of Putin. And there is a lot of Russian influence in Serbia. We know this. The Wagner Group is there. I believe there's rumors going around, they've even opened a cultural center somewhere in Serbia. What a cultural center of a pro-Putin mercenary army looks like, I dread to think. But what I wanted to ask you was about another power that is playing a part of the politics in Serbia and therefore in the region, and that is China. Because China does have a considerable influence in Serbia, probably even more insidious in some parts than Russia. Recently, they purchased a missile defense system that was from a Chinese manufacturer. They had also purchased a facial recognition software in Belgrade that is Chinese-based. And not so long ago, Serbian police actually trained with a Chinese contingent of their police force that has been rumored to have been used to suppress the Uyghur population in China. So could you elaborate then on some of the influences, maybe a bit of Russia if you want, but I also want to hear about China's influence and how that's affecting your policies. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there another question? Last chance. Yes, over here. The lady, and then young man in the second row, and then we
Good evening, Prime Minister.
close the list.
My name is Teresa Reiter. I'm with the US Embassy in Vienna. We've met before. I have a question. Since you applied for membership in the European Union has a lot of problems and an unsure future itself. What kind of future would you wish for the European Union, and what can Kosovo contribute to that future?
Okay, thank you. And second row.
I'm Murat Hasanov. I have a personal question actually. Considering your life journey, prison experience, or probably also towards experience or war experience, how could you manage to be so confident and to keep psychological health? Because it's also an important part of our lives that we miss to ask politicians to be also, to see an example and to learn from.
Okay. In order to complete the list, I will try to ask you a last question from my side. The question is, where would you see the priorities EU and also United States could do in order to not only to stabilize the situation in the Western Balkans, but to bring real development and progress?
Regarding dreams, as if discussing reality was not complicated enough. We know this thesis that through dreams we escape reality. I will reach there now. So that point. So dreams as a kind of means of escapism. But I think that in politics, perhaps not only, the opposite could also be rather true. And that is that when your dreams become unbearable, you fall into reality. So when you do not have enough energy or courage to pursue your dreams, you get real. How should I put it? Of course, there is no such clear contradiction of the two. But I believe that it's very important, education system and political parties and media, to help the youth not to give up on their dreams and compromise their desires too easy and too soon. It's very important, because the reality that we live today is because some other people before us were pursuing certain dreams, which might not have been realized altogether or fully, but nonetheless, we have this well-being nowadays. What we have is not exactly what someone else was pursuing. They were pursuing much more than this, but nonetheless, we got this. So the reality we live in is because of the dreams of some people. And this is very important for progress, in spite of setbacks, in spite of defeats. So I think for Europe, this is very important. Next generation of Europeans. To Chancellor Nehammer, I was trying to explain the relation with Serbia, how we need to normalize relations. We are a normal country, but our relations are not normal. And patiently, I was trying to explain. But then again, I can confirm that relations between Kosovo and Austria are very good. In Austria, we see a friend, an ally, and a partner. We have increased our exports to Austria by 28% last year, whereas in general it's 23%. We need more economic investments from Austria. And regarding the issue of Romania and Bulgaria not entering the Schengen zone, of course, I find it sad for this outcome. I wish it was otherwise. But then again, we live at times when we should try to change things for better rather fast, because in this new situation we cannot use old methods. So I think that we need more debate within EU. So some things we do rather fast. So if Romania and Bulgaria did not enter Schengen zone in contrast to Croatia, what is the shortest period of time to correct this? This is how I would think about it. What is the shortest period of time to do it otherwise, so they join? Like, they have been delaying so much visa liberalization for Kosovo. Many years ago, we have fulfilled all the criteria. But our image was not good. We improved our image, and let's do visa liberalization as soon as we can. So I'm not very much into lamenting about what has happened. I wish it was otherwise, but what to do now? You know, there is no such thing as time machine. So let's learn lessons and do otherwise fast. This is what I use in political doing. And what I think is a bit diluting in relation of the democratic West in general with Belgrade is that everybody noticed a double opportunism in Belgrade. First kind of opportunism is waiting for the end of war in Ukraine. Who's going to win? So this is not fair. We should not wait for the war to end. We should help it end with victory of Ukraine. So this opportunism of being a kind of ironic spectator is very problematic. The second type of opportunism is waiting for new elections in US. I'm convinced that Belgrade is waiting for 2024 and wants to delay dialogue and agreement with Kosovo until they hope change of president in White House. So this double opportunistic approach, this waiting in double manner, is creating some false hopes in the West. Because, you know, when somebody is opportunistic, to some people that can be hopeful. Because when you're opportunistic, maybe you can switch sides. And I'm not sure that that is really possible. Russia is so deep in Serbia that this opportunism has also the effects of emballage. I'm not sure that Serbia is in front of a choice. EU or Russian Federation, US or China. I'm afraid they've already made the choice, but Democratic West doesn't really want to see. And that's why it's a bit too much of relaxation in the Democratic West, because they think that Belgrade still didn't make the choice. This opportunistic behavior in double manner creates these false hopes for midterm. And here I think more engagement of US, more engagement of EU, more engagement of NATO in the Western Balkans, and in particular in relation to Belgrade, is needed. Yes, there are links with China and they are growing, but you know, when you ally yourself with Russian Federation, allying also with China looks like a bit positive, you know. So because China is an autocracy but is not at war. So I think that now it's much easier to do business with China, precisely because of what Russian Federation has done. And this is, I think, in the aspect of, how should I put it, autocracies are faster, not necessarily for good, but they are faster. Democracies are also have the strong aspect of being procedural. I don't know who say, Gianni Vattimo or who, that democracy is a procedure. So this, like, you bring legitimacy prior to decision making. And that's why you have this solidarity among autocrats in the world nowadays. This is the second, I believe, element of why we see this cooperation. It is very important not to be cynical towards EU. It's very important not to be bitter towards EU. We can be critical. Europe learned us how to be critical. We are children, intellectually, we are children of European critique. So let's be critical, but not bitter and not cynical. Very important not to be bitter, not to be cynical, but to be critical. Kosovo has no alternative but EU and NATO. And I don't want to have any other alternative. Sometimes I'm dissatisfied, but my dissatisfaction should turn into critique, not into bitterness or cynicism. And I think this is the contribution of Kosovo to the region and to the EU in current affairs. In the future, I think that we are a great example, even though not a big country, of a double success story. Number one, success story of NATO intervention, because despotic President Putin wants to say Western intervention in Afghanistan and Iraq has failed, Kosovo is a temporary success. No, Kosovo is a success here to stay. So we are a success story of humanitarian intervention. And second is we are a success story of quality democracy and economic development going hand in hand. Because some autocratic powers and superpowers want to show that development doesn't need democracy. And we are showing that it's possible and doable to have together development and democracy. So these are two very important elements that Kosovo brings to EU for the winning narrative in the 21st century. So the last thing, again, it's wrong to try to look for contradictions between EU and US. We have President Biden, who is the progressive leader of the world today. If you see the program of President Biden, it's even more progressive than of President Obama. And you have Europe, where the welfare social state is in its DNA of democratic state building. Together with NATO, I think the transatlantic bridge is indispensable, at least in this decade and next. It's indispensable. We don't have to find nuances among each other now. Our grandfathers and our grandmothers lived in the time of different kind of fascisms. Our generation is living in the time of Russian fascism. All fascism must be defeated. Fascism is not reserved for Germany after Weimar Republic and for Italy between two world wars. Neither for Pinochet's Chile half a century ago. Fascism can fall upon every nation and state. We have to be careful. Unfortunately, fascism as a plague has fallen upon Russia now, which is a nuclear superpower. However, this fascism must be defeated as well. And to this end, US-EU cooperation is even more important now than in the 20th century.
Dear Mr. Prime Minister, before I close, you may allow me also to announce our next event here at Diplomatic Academy From today, it will be in 2 weeks, the 26th of January, and it will be an event in German language. The title is called Der Ukraine-Krieg und die neue globale Machtstruktur. Colonel Reisner, who is not only commander of the Austrian Guard, but also one of the highest esteemed experts on the war in Ukraine, not only in Austria, but all over Europe, will analyze the situation and the perspectives, and I will try to contribute also a few reflections on the consequences for the global power structure, not only in Europe, but even beyond. Okay, now I just want to invite all of you also to have a glass of wine or water or any drink with you. But before we go to that, I really want to thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. You gave us a lesson today, a lesson about your personal experience, your very high and deep political experience, which is quite different to all the people probably over here in the room. And you also gave us a lesson about your professional, analytical, intellectual knowledge. It really was a pleasure to follow you. I only can congratulate you. We learned a lot, and I guess you probably got quite a lot of new backers and people who have become friends of Kosovo and of the Prime Minister of this country. Thank you so much. It really was a pleasure. Big hand for you. Okay. Every politician and statesman also earns quite some applause. Not only artists need it, also politicians need it sometimes.